Yes, which reminds me, this will be recorded, folks. So if that's okay, if that's not okay with people, you better let us know now. But normally we record all these things. Anyway, as I was saying, Margaret's background, she's from Renville, Connemara. She has degrees in ecology and conservation, PhD in zoology. And since about 2000, she's been working in this area of conservation, environmental education, various postdocs, etc., since the year 2000. Now, on this project, she's the communications officer, the communication engagement officer, or the community engagement officer with this LIFE project. The Irish Uplands Forum is terribly interested in this LIFE project because, as you know, the uplands and blanket bogs are kind of synonymous. And there's loads of SSEs in protected areas in the uplands. So, you know, a new innovative approach to uplands management would be really important in our opinion. And this LIFE project, it goes beyond the usual sort of LIFE projects, which just looks at, you know, direct impacts on annex habitats and species. The point of the LIFE integrated project is that you integrate this work of conservation with other economic sectors, with local development and local society. So the integration part of this, we would feel is terribly important, and you know, need to kind of get that right, absolutely. So tonight now, Margaret is going to give us our presentation, and this will be followed by a contribution from one of our board members, Brendan O'Keefe, who's a consultant, a human geographer. Brendan will just start off, I suppose, the response, you know, by talking at the beginning, and then it'll be open to Q&A to everyone for the rest of the evening. So I think it's over to you now, Margaret, to start the presentation. Share your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mary. I hope I am already sharing the screen. Yeah, right. Brilliant. So thank you very much for the kind invitation to, first of all, present at your lecture series, and for the really warm welcome, Mary. So I'll get started. So just to give you an outline of what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So I'll give you an overview of the Wild Atlantic Nature Project. It's quite a big project. So yeah, it'll be a very broad overview of the project itself and the work that we've done to date, and also the ongoing work. But I'll be really focusing on our land restoration program and the different elements from that, which include the Natura Communities Initiative, pilot restoration retrofit project, and also an example of a large-scale project where we're demonstrating peatland restoration. So thank you, Mary, for explaining a bit about the integrated projects, because they're a relatively new type of LIFE project. But just to give people a bit of background, I know my colleagues have presented at this lecture series before, but for the benefit of people that haven't attended, just to give you a little bit of background to the LIFE IP project that we are. So EU LIFE projects are funded through the Nature and Climate Fund of the EU. And the integrated projects are usually have a bigger budget and are longer term projects for the reasons that Mary explained. You know, they're integrating a lot of different elements, and generally they're informing policy and frameworks. So the total budget for our project at the start was over 20 million, with most of that coming from the EU, but also money coming from 10 project partners. So the National Parks and Wildlife Service are the main coordinating partner, but we do have 9 other project partners. And integrated projects, they really try to bring together the managing authorities the key stakeholders for developing these frameworks and informing policy in the particular area that they're looking at. Another remit of integrated projects is to bring in complementary funding for scaling up and scaling out elements of the project that are working well. So if you're piloting something, and you want to maybe develop that project further, you do have that ability to bring in additional funding. So to date, the project now has over 50 million euros worth of funding to fund various different elements of the project. So the main aim of Wild Atlantic Nature is to assist in the delivery and supporting the management of high quality habitats. So the prioritized action framework, which is the management of our Natura 2000 sites, which are our special areas of conservation and our special protection areas. And the particular focus of Wild Atlantic Nature is blanket bog SACs, or SACs that have blanket bog as qualifying interest in the northwest of Ireland. So here is a map showing our project area, or the SACs within our project area. So it's quite an expansive area, going from the Slievaughties in Galway right up to the Inishowen Peninsula in Donegal. So there are 35 SACs in total within the project, covering 260,000 hectares of land, or in excess of that. And the heading there says, the focus is on farmers and communities. And the reason for that is because of all that land, 80% of it is privately owned, and most of it is also actively farmed. And so, we need to work with farmers and local communities in order to conserve and restore these blanket bogs, for that very reason, that they are, for the most part, privately owned. So, the work that we'll be doing with farmers and communities will be in addition and complementary to the work that's been undertaken in state lands, for example, in national parks. So I guess the reason that we need to restore our blanket bogs and upland habitats, what has driven, I guess, the damage to these habitats, and a lot of it has been caused by non-alignment of policy, and farmers getting mixed messages, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But this non-alignment of policy has resulted in declines in water quality, loss of biodiversity, and increase in carbon emissions. And the key objective for Wild Atlantic Nature is to deliver high quality habitats, but doing that in a way that's sensitive to local contexts, so that we can deliver for the environment, but also for farmers and local communities also. And this dual benefit is really important. If there's going to be no social benefit for farmers or local communities, there'll be no buy-in from them. And if there's no environmental benefit, then taxpayers' money is being wasted. And just to illustrate, I guess, how policy and place and practice are interlinked, this Venn diagram shows that, where we've got these three different pillars. We've got policy, we've got our practice, we've got our place. Policy is driving particular practices, so whether that's agriculture, climate, biodiversity, these practices are shaping what's happening in our local environments, in nature and communities, and policy is impacting on the local environment as well. So there's very much, it's very interconnected. So I think that shows that quite well. So a way that you can align policy, and this is what we spent the first couple of years of the project doing, is demonstrating results-based agri-environment program. I'll refer to it as RBAPs because it's a bit of a mouthful. And this is nothing new, this approach. There's various EIPs and life projects have used this approach in the past. So this was, for anyone that's not familiar with the approach, it's where you use the ecological integrity as an indicator of the ecosystem services that habitats or ecosystems are providing. So ecological integrity of the land or farms are assessed using scorecards. These scorecards have positive and negative indicator plants. Various hydrological qualities are assessed using scorecards, and also threats and pressures on those ecosystems are also identified. So the higher the quality or the score of your habitat, the higher the quality of your habitat, the higher the score you get, and therefore the higher the payment. So this approach helps to align policy, because you're paying for good water quality, for biodiversity, and for climate, and the communities or the farmers are also benefiting as well, because they're getting a higher payment for higher quality. So we used this approach. We used a whole farm approach because we didn't want any, we wanted to look at the farm as a whole. So this is the peatland scorecard that you can see here, and we also had a grassland scorecard, and also some farms had woodland as well. So all of the habitats on the farm were assessed for their ecological quality, and this information actually is available on our website on wildatlanticnature.ie for anyone that's interested in having a closer look. So I should go back to this as well. So just to the diagram here, where you can see that you've got scores here on this axis. I don't know, can you see my mouse? But payments then. So, to reach a minimum score of 4 would be the aim, but there'd be financial incentives then to bring farms up to an 8 or more. So it was payment for the habitat that was there, but then supporting actions were also paid for. So if there was improvements that could be made on the farm, and these were identified through the scorecard, you could incentivize improvements by having supporting actions. And examples of supporting actions here, these images are actually from the Pearl Mussel project, just to illustrate some of the types of supporting actions that farmers could look for. So these are some examples of peat dams and drain management here, where you're trying to stabilize the water table within the peatland. So that's the images there that are on the left hand side of the screen. This area here on the right with the greener grass, and these were put in, these wooden dams and plastic dams were to slow sediment going in, slow down the rate of sediment entering the river, because the river downstream of this was a pearl mussel river. So excess sediment getting in could be quite damaging for pearl mussel populations. So slowing that flow of sediment into the river was an important way to manage the ecological integrity there for that species from that particular example. Other restoration techniques might include removal of invasive species, or installing temporary fences to allow revegetation in certain areas, or putting in crossing points at rivers. So as I said, the first 2 years of the project involved this ORBAPS approach. So the approach was designed and implemented across 8 SACs that are illustrated here. So in Mayo, in Sligo, and in Donegal, there were, I think initially they were hoping to have about 100 farmers as part of this ORBAPS, but it's extended to over 800 farmers. Over 50 advisors were trained into how to score the lands using the scorecards, with over 60,000 hectares of land surveyed, with around €3 million direct payments to farmers through payment for ecosystem services, and over 100 supporting actions. And lessons from this approach were integrated into the Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plan, and those lessons now have been incorporated into Acres CP. So since 2023, we've kept busy and we've been doing a lot of work with farmers still and communities. So we provide advice to farmers and Acres CP. We also are continuing to survey lands, for example, commonage lands that may not have been surveyed during our earlier or during the ORBAPs. So lands in Mayo and Donegal have been surveyed and are being surveyed, and will be moving into Connemara next year. We're building capacity through various approaches to education and knowledge exchange projects. We're developing restoration action plans for various sites, and including monitoring of the impact of any restoration measures that are put in place. We're establishing a network of demonstration farms and sites so that people can see what peatland restoration looks like. And we're also delivering large-scale restoration projects. So, very large sites that might be outside the scope of the Common Agricultural Policy, where this may be in private lands or in commonage lands, and we're also leveraging the funding to support those restoration projects as well. So all of that is leading towards this land restoration program that we're putting in place. And I've got a diagram to show you now. It looks a bit complicated, or something, a diagram on the back of a plug or something, but I can talk you through it. So we've got our landscape restoration program here at the center, and there's multiple policy drivers for nature conservation and restoration up here on the top left, for to address issues with biodiversity, with water quality and climate. These directives drive this drive policy. So you've got the Birds and Habitats Directive, the Water Framework Directive, a National Biodiversity Action Plan, the National Restoration Law, so various drivers. And there's also the payment for ecosystem services that I've just described through the ORBAPs can be an effective tool of delivering conservation objectives, but also act as a socioeconomic driver for restoration. And this can create a positive feedback loop where increased restoration leads to increase in payments for ecosystem services, and in demand, or in turn, this is creating an additional demand for restoration. And if this demand is not met, then the system kind of, will fall apart and collapse. And our land restoration program is looking to address that demand through various initiatives. So these initiatives include Natura communities, various large-scale restoration projects. For example, we've funding from Shared Island to deliver large-scale projects, peatland restoration projects. We have a restoration retrofit pilot project that I mentioned at the beginning, and also, establishing these farm demonstration sites, a network of them. So we're using those to demonstrate how we can deliver on the demand for nature conservation and restoration. And the effective delivery of this restoration program is depending on, significant development of capacity in terms of training and education, finance, but also, an evidence base to establish the efficacy of that approach. So monitoring, reporting, and verification and research, all of that is really important just to ensure that the efficacy of what we're doing, so that's part of it as well. So it's quite complex. But if we can address all those areas, we will be doing good work. So for the next part of the lecture, I'm just going to talk through these three examples that are fundamental in our land restoration program. So Natura Communities, I don't know, has anyone heard of it? We've been trying to spread the word about it, but it is an initiative by Wild Atlantic Nature with the support from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, where we're looking to connect local communities with the Natura 2000 sites in their areas. And the aim of it is to build capacity at a local level where we can enable community-led nature conservation and restoration projects. So essentially what we want to do is we want to build a professional, local workforce that has the knowledge and skills to deliver bog restoration work. But I guess you could apply this approach to various different types of habitats within the Natura 2000 network. So it's good, I guess, to bring this back to the very beginning and where this has stemmed from. So everything begins with an idea. Some ideas are good, some ideas maybe not so good, but we think this is a really good idea. So the two gentlemen that you can see up there in the top right-hand corner of the screen, that's Derek McLaughlin on the left, who is the project manager for Wild Atlantic Nature, and on the right is Martin Gavin, who is a farmer from Mayo. He's has a multi-generational farm in the Bunduraha catchment in South Mayo, and he's also a community worker, and he volunteers his time with the Leanan Development Association. So he's been involved in community development for many, many years. So I mentioned the Bunduraha catchment there. It's a really important catchment within the Muileray Sheafree SAC. It's one of the most important catchments for the freshwater pearl mussel in Ireland, for anyone that isn't familiar with it. And these farmers in the area were involved in the pearl mussel project, and a lot of them have moved on to the Acre CP scheme now. But there's a major problem in that catchment with rhododendron ponticum. They're losing scores in their ORBAPs because of its presence on their lands. A lot of the time, you know, it's in very big stands, it's quite extensive, and it's too big of a problem to be solved by an individual farmer. It needs a concerted effort. And Martin, you know, he recognized that, you know, there's a lot of investment in state lands for work removing rhododendron ponticum, but there wasn't anything really, you know, at that level available for private lands. So through, sorry, gone the wrong way, through Wild Atlantic Nature, we were able to draw down funds from the National Parks and Wildlife Service to pilot a catchment-wide approach to rhododendron control for the Bunduraha River. And we put that work out to tender, and the Leanan Development Association partnered with the Pearl Mussel Project EIP, and they managed to secure the tender to demonstrate rhododendron control within the Bunduraha. So the way it worked is Leanan Development Association got the funds, and they were able to pay or give money to the farmers to pay operatives to do the work and remove the rhododendron on their land. So it was not, I guess, the most viable approach to it. You know, so Leanan Development Association, they're you know, a voluntary organization. They didn't have the capacity, say, to employ people directly. There's insurance concerns. So it wasn't, from an administrative capacity point of view, it wasn't like perfect approach. However, the pilot was very successful, and it has helped to inform, you know, catchment approach to rhododendron control. They used a sample area to develop this most suitable control techniques across different scenarios where you have rhododendron. For example, different densities of rhododendron, the habitats and locations that they occur within. So because of the success of that approach, further funding was available from the national parks for another phase of this project. So Leanan Development Association then linked in with Forum Connemara, who are the local development company, to deliver the next phase of this work. And Forum Connemara were very well placed. Obviously, a development company, they're used to administering grants and funding. They had previous experience working with local farmers and communities through an IP that they worked on, and they have that administrative capacity to employ people, to ensure people in the workplace and that. So that has been working really well. And to date now, after 2 years or so, there's 20 operatives working in habitat restoration in 3 different special areas of conservation. They continue to work in Wheelwray Sheafree. They're also now working in the 12 Bens Garan complex and the Connemara Bog complex. So they've been doing really great work, and there is a demand for their services within the wider area. So while we are providing some funding through the Conservation Measures Unit of MPWS, this group have been able to go out and secure other contracts as well. So there have been, I think, their completed work in Connemara National Park, so state-owned lands managed by MPWS. They've got work with Quilcha as well. So they're now, as a group, are able to maximize these opportunities that become available for them in terms of the work that in nature conservation and restoration. And it also can help ensure continuity of employment, because one thing with the funding that we're offering at the moment, it's just year by year, so it's not multi-annual. So these groups need to secure contracts in order to ensure continuity of employment for their operatives. So I like to show this picture because pictures can speak 1,000 words. So what this shows here, from very modest beginnings and with the right people involved, you can quickly build something great. So we have, within 2.5 years, you have a professional workforce. The picture there at the bottom, that workforce now has more than doubled, and they are clearing rhododendron mostly, but they're also engaging with the local community. They're getting the local community involved because they're going onto people's private land. So obviously the community need to have bought into this approach. They're also delivering training. So they've been doing really great work within their own communities, but there's also been elements of peer-to-peer learning as well, where other communities from other parts of the country have come to see the work that they're doing, and they've been very generous in hosting these visits to their sites. And also they've been traveling to Mayo, to Donegal, to deliver training as well. So it's excellent to see how quickly something can take off with the right people involved. So we have 2 new groups formed now, these Natura community groups. We've got one in Erris in North Mayo, and then Cordon na Harigala in Dunlewy in County Donegal. So just to show our project area again, and I've circled there 7 SACs where we have community-led conservation ongoing. We've over 40 jobs created within this area, and in excess of 2 million euros invested in these 3 groups. And there is an appetite for this approach to you know, from other communities as well. So we're looking, you know, potentially extending into other parts of Mayo, groups in Leitrim that are quite interested in this Natura Communities approach as well. And even this approach going beyond the Wild Atlantic Project area, Wild Atlantic Nature Project area as well. So as well as extending into different areas, the types of work that these groups are engaging in as well is has the potential to extend into other bog restoration measures. And actually in early September, a group from Drúdra visited various restoration projects in the Scottish Highlands, which included bog restoration. So here you can see to the left of the picture, you've got some drain blocking and reprofiling on upland blanket bog in the Scottish Highlands. You've got the middle photographs there. I know they're quite small, but these images actually, and a little account of the visit is available on the Dúlra Facebook page for anyone that's interested. So we visited the National Trust, where they're doing rhododendron control within communities, and also they're making biochar from rhododendron. And we also visited a site where there's a farm cluster that's demonstrating farm diversification and river management and river restoration as well. And Nature Scott actually have put a blog on their website. If you Google Dúlra and Nature Scott, it should come up, but it talks through and discusses the aims of the visit and also what we hope to achieve from that visit as well. So it's a nice read. It's not too long, and I'm happy to share that link with anyone after the talk or put it in the chat. So I mentioned biochar there as well. And one thing about these Natura communities, they kind of, I guess, the whole area of research and development and fostering innovation has been something that we've realized that can happen from bringing these groups from, you know, of farmers and other community members together, where they can identify potential issues or opportunities. And one of these, Dúlra actually have been looking at making biochar from rhododendron brash that's left standing following their treatment, and also the use of wool as potentially an alternative to coir, which is coconut husk, which is used a lot in bog restoration. So the potential use, sustainable and circular use of farm byproducts is currently being explored by the Dúlra group. And to foster this innovation and support it a little, Life's Too Good Foundation, who are philanthropists, had provided a fund for Wild Atlantic Nature for communities to support innovation or, you know, expansion of this community-led approach to nature conservation. So we're very grateful to Life's Too Good for that. So they've given some money for Dúlra to test and manufacture at a very small scale some of these products, as well as communities that might want to demonstrate peatland restoration and also to maybe explore the idea of developing the Natura Communities initiative within their own areas. And the aspiration from Wild Atlantic Nature is that we could potentially roll this approach out to all blanket bog Natura 2000 sites. And what it really demonstrates is the provision of capacity to deliver nature restoration at a community level. But importantly, so yeah, you get that work done, but the resources and the financial rewards for doing that work, for those to be retained within the local community for rural development, I think that's really, really important as well. So I'll move on to the next initiative, and this is our restoration retrofitting pilot project. And I guess you can't talk about bog restoration without bringing up turbary and turf cutting. So if we go back to the ORBAPs again, and where you have turbary on peatlands, the ecological quality is generally low, and so there's low scores through acre CP, and then lower scores results in lower payments. So we also need to acknowledge that turf is a really important domestic fuel. It's still being used widely. Some people are fully dependent on turf to heat their homes and heat water. So that has to be acknowledged as well. So in the raised bogs, there was a compensation scheme where up to €1,500 is paid annually for 15 years. So, this is a great opportunity for people, but what might be an alternative approach to this? And what we came up with is this restoration retrofit approach. So how that works is, well, first of all, what we want to demonstrate, if we can get this to work, and I'll explain how we intend to see it working. So if we can demonstrate this reduction in use of turf using that retrofitting approach, we'll meet the obligations for blanket bog conservation within our SECs. We can help achieve our vision for biodiversity by 2050, where we all live sustainably in a healthy environment that is valued and protected by everybody. We can also help achieve climate objectives and create more resilient ecosystems to climate change, and reduce our carbon footprint as well. So we can talk about all those, policy and high level benefits from, reducing turf cutting, but what are the potential co-benefits for homeowners? So there's improved air quality, increased thermal comfort, lower energy costs, lower carbon emissions, reduced energy poverty, increased social cohesion, where all the, I guess, key players are sitting around the table trying to figure out a solution to this demand for turf, the need for warmer homes, and the need to restore and have functioning peatlands again. And there's also potential opportunities for employment through the actual retrofitting of homes, but also the peatland restoration that's required for the land as well. So where are we piloting it? So we're piloting the project in the Owen Duff Nathan Complex SAC. So this was one of our SACs where we delivered the ORBAPs project. So we've already commenced planning with 4 houses in Ballycroy. So for those of you who don't know, Owen Duff Nathan is in County Mayo. So you've got Newport on the map here, Newport down on the south. And that's the red line there is the road going out towards Mulranny and onto Achill, and then northwards up to Bangor Erris. So it's quite an extensive area. So we've extended this pilot, an invitation to join the pilot, to all the participants in the ORBAPs scheme, but not all of them are going to get in. We've a limited number of places. So we've invited expressions of interest. In addition to the 4 homes in Ballycroy, we're hoping to get another 20 homes retrofitted, and we will have a range of criteria for the selection and prioritization of those people. So to be as fair as possible, and also to be mindful that what we're trying to achieve and what our objectives are. There'll be financial support from the project, and also we'll be looking to draw down on the existing grants that are available for retrofitting through the SEEI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. So just to demonstrate, so there's 2 processes going on with this retrofit. There's the restoration and the retrofit. So the homeowners will be recruited. While we'll be planning for the retrofit of the successful participants for the retrofit, while the plans are being made for their house, there'll be plans made for their peatlands as well. So you can see the processes here, and I'll talk through them. But yeah, you can just see there's two processes going on at the same time. Wild Atlantic Nature will be overseeing this pilot with the support from a project advisory group who include SEI and DEC, who are the Department of Environment, Climate, Communications. So yeah, we don't have all the answers. We're learning as we go along, but we are hoping that we can demonstrate that this will be a good approach to reducing the demand for turf. So the selection criteria, so you have to own lands within the SAC and/or hold turbary rights. So that's the most important. You need to get into the scheme. So as well as being an RBAPS participant, you have to own lands within the SAC. You have to be willing to engage in peatland restoration. And again, it'll be a whole farm approach. So we don't want people to, agree to something for their SAC lands and, be damaging other lands outside of the SAC. Whether you currently cut or burn turf will not affect the selection process. You have to have your primary residence within 5 kilometers of the SAC, and we've split the SAC into 3 areas to have representation for all communities around the SAC, because it is quite a large area. And then in terms of the SEI grants, your house needs to have been, it needs to be an older house to qualify for the approach that we're taking. We're taking the one-stop shop approach, which requires that homes are built and occupied before 2011, and it has to be the homeowner that is the applicant. So the retrofit itself, so Wild Atlantic Nature will contract an SEI approved one-stop shop operator to undertake a home energy assessment, and there will be a full report provided to the homeowner that will see the types of measures that are needed to bring their home up to a BER rating of B2, a building energy rating of 2, a B2. And the reason for that is because that's what gets you in to draw down the SEI grants. The homeowner makes the decision to proceed or not with the retrofit based on how much potentially it'll cost them, but also about the work that will be required within their lands in terms of the restoration actions. So they're making a decision on 2 very important aspects there. So the finance, as I said, will come from ourselves. Wild Atlantic Nature will be providing up to 40,000 generally, but people that are entitled to fuel allowance, they'll get 50,000. There's potentially 50% or up to 35,000 grants or worth of grants are available from SEI, and then there is the potential that this won't cover the retrofit of the home, so the homeowner may have to contribute something as well. They'll also enter a contract with MPWS for the restoration of turbary areas on their lands, and the sustainable management of their lands into the future as well. So just to give you an idea of some scenarios, so here the cost of the retrofit for the house could be 87,000. Wild Atlantic Nature puts forward 40, grants of up to 30 might be available, and then there could be potentially a contribution of 17,000 from the homeowner. This is kind of the worst case scenario where you've got like a really, really old house or a really, really big house. And on average in 2023, the cost of a deep retrofit for a detached house was actually more along the line, I think it was 64,000 euro. So another example here is you've got a house that requires 61,000 euro worth of work we're contributing 40, and then SEI grants at 21. So, you know, the homeowner doesn't have to contribute anything, but they do have to enter, you know, a legal agreement with MPWS to restore their peatlands and stop turf cutting. So that is there, you know, there is a contribution. The restoration action plan itself for the lands. So this will be overseen by Wild Atlantic Nature, the scope, scale, cost benefit analysis, potential funding sources, that will all be established by ourselves. We will design the restoration action plan in full agreement with the landowner, and it'll obviously need to meet the regulatory requirements in terms of, you know, maybe it will require planning. So we will put through the whole restoration plan through whatever regulations are required. Again, the landowner enters a contract with MPWS for a restoration on their land and a management agreement. They'll agree to stop cutting turf, and at the end of it, we'll hopefully have a restored blanket bog. You getting higher ecological quality, so higher payments through the agri-environment schemes, and improved management of the SAC. So we sent out invitations for expressions of interest in May to almost 200 people, and by mid-July we had almost 50 expressions of interest. So it's quite a high percentage of people interested in this. So at the moment we're looking to establish whether people establish the eligibility of these 50 people, and anybody that qualifies for or is eligible for getting into the pilot will receive a home energy assessment. So Wild Atlantic Nature will cover the cost of that, and then we will prioritize applications. So the 20 prioritize applications based on the amount of land the person has in the SAC, and look to bring in a further 20 homeowners into the pilot. So just to round that off with the key points, it's voluntary. So we're not forcing anyone into doing this. It's community-led. It's targeting a reduction in the use of peat as a household fuel. We're looking to restore turbary plots, particularly in particular where they're present. There's a droop retrofit of the home, bringing them to a higher BER, so warmer homes. We're also looking to investigate alternative solid fuels such as timber, because there is a cultural significance of having a fire in the home. It's really important. So that's something that we're going to look to establish, you know, a potential alternative solid fuel for people that want to keep that fire. And of course, it's worth noting that this is a pilot. The original funding that we received that we're directing towards this pilot was actually for land purchase. But we didn't think that was the best approach in terms of, you know, rural communities buying up tracts of land. So it was better to, I guess, look at the sustainable management of land. So we did expect a decision on that amendment to the funding in August, but we're still waiting. But the initial signs are that that is positive. So we will have funding to deliver it. And you know, the objective is that we can develop a template for the broader rollout of this approach, and provide, you know, viable options for rural households to reduce that need for turf. So to finish off, just to give you not too many slides left. I know I'm probably running tight for time, Mary, so sorry. Cut me off if you need to. So this Waterlands project is actually a project that's been overseen by UCD. It's a European project, Horizon project. So Wild Atlantic Nature are managing the Irish action site for this project. There's 6 action sites across Europe. So we're managing this one for in Ireland. And it's based in the Culca and Éireann Uplands SAC on the Leitrim and Cavan border. And this is demonstrating a big peatland restoration project So there's 6 restoration sites within the SAC. This map here is showing the outline of the SAC, with the areas highlighted in orange being restoration sites. There's been engagement and positive engagement and direct involvement with local farmers in this project. There's going to be monitoring going on as well. The main site for this is Slieveneiren, and there's 30 monitoring plots there. There's been restoration training, which commenced in 2023 with local farmers included. We'll also have restoration plans being put into action this autumn, and there's a schools program as well being implemented across the region. Monitoring is a huge part of this project, so there's vegetation has been monitored to assess changes as a result of restoration actions. There's water loggers to assess changes in the hydrology as a result of measures put in to control erosion, gully blocking, and blocking artificial drainage. There's monitoring plots for water quality, mainly looking at dissolved organic carbon and the total organic carbon content within the water. There's greenhouse gas emissions being monitored from 9 plots, a weather station to understand environmental variables, and also an erosion experiment to assess carbon loss as well, which will feed into a wider national assessment. So that just demonstrates one example of a large-scale restoration project that we're involved in as well. So I'll go back to our land restoration program again, and here, you can see that that's at the center of what's happening here. And I guess we also need to think, so this, while it is complex, in the bigger picture, where we start bringing in all the different stakeholders and the different aspects that we need to include in peatland restoration, I'll just move on to an integrated approach here. So here are the different aspects of peatland or nature restoration. This one is for peatland, but I guess it can apply to any ecosystem. So you've got the ecosystem itself and how it's functioning, the type of activities that are going on in it, the training and knowledge that's required to manage things sustainably, the sociocultural and behavior of us all, finance and governance, project management, engagement. So there's an awful lot that you need to consider when you're thinking about restoration. And then there's all the different stakeholders that we need to include and that need to come together to agree on how things work. So I guess peatland restoration and nature restoration is very, very complex. And I think that this illustrates that. And I guess what our project, Wild Atlantic Nature, is trying to do is to identify where the challenges are, where there are potential opportunities, and work through them. So I hope the examples I gave you tonight kind of demonstrate that. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Margaret. We are running over time, but it's
Sorry.
such an interesting presentation, Margaret. I didn't want to interrupt you or disturb
Sorry.
you.
Yeah.
Now, Brendan O'Keefe will hopefully respond with a few quick points. Then we'll open it up to everyone to ask questions, etc. So, Brendan, are you still there?
I am indeed, Marianne. Absolutely thrilled with that. That was absolutely excellent. I really, really enjoyed that. And we couldn't interrupt you, Margaret. No way. I think everybody here was probably very taken by your model. You're kind of 3 legs of the stool there between place, policy, and practice. Because so many schemes focus on the practice and they focus inside the farm gate. And yes, you do that and you do it well through the results-based system. You did mention policy. I know that's a longer game because so many of these schemes and programs and initiatives, they're very worthy, but they are stop and start. You're looking at prolonging yours, you're scaling up, you're scaling out. So that mainstreaming and moving from being a scheme to something that's more mainstream. That's really commendable. And then just to commend you on the place aspect and the place making, if you like, and the involvement of communities. And all of us will be looking out more for, Natura 2000, Natura communities and how that rolls out. I suppose there's a question around that, and maybe this is something that hasn't come up for you yet, is getting communities involved in the decision making, not just being on the receiving end of the benefits of the wild Atlantic nature, but actually contributing their expertise, their tacit knowledge, the value of local knowledge, that place-making dimension that communities can contribute to that. So let's maybe unpack that a little bit together. And the other thing I just want to comment on, and this is my final comment is, when you're delivering a program like you are, you have your map and you started with your maps and you draw lines on your maps, but biodiversity and nature doesn't recognize those boundaries. So, there are other schemes and initiatives happening in those catchment areas or indeed close to them. I'm thinking in particular of Corncrake Life and Life on Macker and so on. And I'm wondering, what are the interfaces between Wild Atlantic Nature and all of these other excellent initiatives that are happening in those catchment areas in their broadest sense? So just 2 points there, Margaret, if you'd like to respond to those.
Yeah, in terms of the decision making, I think that's a really interesting point. And I don't know, my best place to answer that question. I guess like we're looking at the management of the SACs in terms of, their qualifying interests and the conservation objectives. And, they're quite set in place. So in terms of like, I'm not sure where exactly you're getting at in terms of the decision making, but in terms of, I guess, from our Natura communities approach, like I would see like that we're looking to empower those local communities to be able to maybe identify some of the threats and pressures that are going on within their local area, and them being best placed to see what work needs to be done from a nature conservation perspective, and then them having the capacity then to draw down funds to deliver that work. So we would look to see them as being quite self-sufficient in the future. So I know it doesn't quite answer your question about decision making, but if you wanted to come back in and maybe phrase the question a different way, but maybe that does answer your question. And then just in terms of like the interfaces between the different projects, again, I would see the Natura communities approach being a really good way of, the Natura communities are like, people in that local area, they're really good at engaging with, say, their neighbors, their friends, and I could see that there's opportunities within those other life projects or within the conservation approach has been taken for those other life projects. I would see that the Natura communities could be a good interface in terms of managing the conservation work that needs to be done within those areas. Like within the projects we do communicate with each other, but I guess we've got quite set objectives in terms of what we're trying to achieve ourselves. But I do see community-led conservation as being really could be fundamental part of all those different systems.
Thanks, Margaret. Anyone else now with the question? Ria, can you see anyone with their hand up? No. Margaret, would you mind if I asked a question then?
Not at all. Work away.
The future for the pilot. It's a wonderful initiative. You're doing really interesting work. It's working. It's showing its value. But after your project is finished, who's going to fund, the rhododendron, the doula work? Who's going to fund or top up the retrofitting if that's very important, you know, something to bring about. So have you thought about that?
Well, we think about that all the time, even though it's something, you know, we're still not, I guess, fully halfway through the project, but it is something that all life projects now are thinking about after life. And, you know, I guess we would hope that, you know, the benefits that we are demonstrating, that there would be people, you know, within those different departments that could, you know, identify that this is a, you know, a worthy or a, you know, a good approach. We also need, you know, a lot of, we need support politically as well for, you know, a lot of this work, because at the end of the day, you know, that's who holds the purse strings. So, you know, it's a combination of having champions within our different project, planting some seeds